If you've been paying attention to the bass music scene for the past half-decade, then you know that Liquid Stranger and Wakaan have been dominating, and rightly so. Martin Stääf, the man behind Liquid Stranger, has been grinding for an insanely long period of time, and in recent years he has finally seen the full fruition of his labor. And when I say an insanely long period of time, I seriously mean it. We're talking over 2 decades just for the Liquid Stranger project, and he was producing for a long time before Liquid Stranger was ever a thing. I only make videos about artists that I'm familiar with and whose music I like, but I always learn some new things through the process. But the things that I learned for this video were on another level. I had no idea that Martin had such a deep history, and I'm excited to share it with you, so let's get into it. Martin Stääf was born in 1978 in Varberg, which is a small town on the west coast of Sweden that only has about 35,000 residents today. It was even smaller when Martin was living there, as they only had about 28,000 residents in 1978. Speaking on his time growing up there, he said, "It's a tranquil place with postcard views. I was fortunate to grow up there, and I love going back today. My dad had a big record collection, and there was a steady stream of music in the house while growing up. Rolling Stones, Simon and Garfunkel, Hendrix, Fleetwood Mac, etc. My mom owned an old Steinway piano. That was my first humble interaction with a musical instrument."
I don't really remember this myself, but they claim that I crawled towards the piano as a baby before I could even sit up and started playing, and you know, that was something I would love to do. I would even, you know, open the piano up and start manipulating things inside to my parents' dismay.
He began to excel as a pianist as a young child, and he began performing at classical piano concerts as a 6-year-old. He also began practicing martial arts at 6 years old, though his parents didn't want him to get into martial arts because they were pacifists, so he had to begin with judo since it's seen as more of a sport. He now practices many different forms of martial arts, but I'll dive into that a little bit later in the video. Right around that time, when he was 6, Martin started to develop his own musical taste when he heard Kraftwerk's The Model. It was a breakthrough moment for him, as it showed him an alternative approach to music, and he realized that through technology, he could be a one-man band and perform every instrument himself. So at 8 years old, he got his first synthesizer and got to work. In an interview, he recalled those early days, saying, "I don't remember a time when I wasn't fascinated by music. I understood early how much it has the ability to change someone's mood. It felt like a good way to communicate emotions. I can make sounds, number 1, that people haven't heard before, and 2, I can actually be in charge of all the instruments and conduct this whole experience. I can control this whole process through these machines." That blew my mind. But as much as Martin loved music, it was far from his only interest. Computer games have always been a big part of his life, which makes perfect sense when we begin to understand who his father was. He worked for IBM and would frequently bring home computers, which sparked a curiosity in Martin. As Martin desired to gain a better understanding of computers, he became particularly fond of the SID chip used in the Commodore 64, which led him to experiment with sound design. His curiosity gave him a desire to have a deep understanding of synthesis, so he would read books on the topic while also experimenting on his own. His dad taught him to code, and he would also spend time working on electrical and mechanical projects with his dad. When he was 9, his dad helped him build a radio antenna. Martin said, "That thing was huge and enveloped my entire room, floor to ceiling. It was a mess, but now I could tune into pirate radio stations across Northern Europe. I spent a lot of time tuning, and that's how I discovered acid house, which was the sound of the budding rave scene." He once stated in an interview that building the antenna was the most important thing to ever happen to him because of how it fostered his budding interest in electronic music. As his love for electronic music grew, he continued to expand his methods of production. He began working with hardware boxes, drum machines, and cassette tapes, as computers weren't evolved enough for producing and recording at the time. Furthermore, there were no tutorials or YouTube videos on how to do it back then, so trial and error became his best friend. By the time he was 11 years old, he started to get involved in the rave scene.
I got into the rave scene in '89, so I was a young teenager at the time, and so I followed. I mean, I started making music earlier than that when I was 8, but kind of found my calling. I found the community. The culture was so inclusive, and that's really what brought me in more so than the music.
He continued to produce music throughout his grade school years, but he never released any of it. It just wasn't something that he had actually considered. But when he graduated high school at 17, it was time to get a job, and he realized that there was nothing else that he wanted to do besides music. So he decided to move to Gothenburg, Sweden, and he got a job as an assistant at a studio called Bohus Sound Recordings. At first, his job mostly consisted of him cleaning, getting coffee, and running errands. But after a while, the owner noticed that Martin made tunes and had a knack for technology. That was when he began helping record bands and producing backtracks for other artists. After a while, he started teaching synthesis and production seminars on the side. During one of those seminars, he met Patrick Olson, who quickly became a close friend, and they formed a progressive trance duo called Nekton and began playing parties. Around that time, Scandinavia was becoming a hotspot for electronic music due to the influence of people like Adam Beyer and DJ Anti. Nekton's music took off quickly, and they traveled around the world with their project for a few years. Martin and Patrick also had a brief side project called Metatron from 2001 to 2002. Martin had a few other solo aliases that he used around this time. He had a breakbeat project called Roca from 2001 to 2003. He briefly had his own solo trance alias called Slugger, which he released 2 songs under in 2002. He also had an alias called Plantman, but I couldn't find any extra information on that project. While he was still active in Nekton, he set up a side project for all of the non-4 on the floor music that he was making. There wasn't much commercial interest for non-4 on the floor dance music at the time, but he found it liberating to create outside of those parameters. And this side project that I'm talking about was the birth of Liquid Stranger.
Well, yeah, I've made a lot of music under a lot of different names. Liquid Stranger came as a side project. Like, I was doing trance music and traveling around the world, and then Liquid Stranger came out of all the stuff that didn't fit, right? When I didn't want to follow the recipe of like a 4 on the floor beat, or I didn't want to just like make it into a certain genre, I needed something for this. So it was a side project that then started getting more and more attention, and from the start it was everything from really hard like drill and bass, like very experimental, challenging EDM, to the very chilled out sounds that got featured on a Canadian label called Chill. So Chill was probably one of the biggest turnaround points for Liquid Stranger, a label run by Andrew Ross Collins, a very dear friend of mine. I'd say if anyone, he's helped me more than most people in the industry. So.
But even after starting Liquid Stranger, he still continued to form a few new side projects. In 2004, he teamed up with his brother, who went by the name Dorothy's Magic Bag, and they formed Hectopascal. They released 2 EPs in 2004 and 2005, as well as an album in 2005. Alongside the inception of Hectopascal, Martin and his brother also started a record label called Candy Mind Records. Martin also released a single EP under the name Bloat Suture in 2006. In 2005, Martin decided to leave Nekton to fully focus on Liquid Stranger, which was the first time that he would be focusing on a single project since the start of Nekton. Patrick continued on with Nekton as a solo act, but it appears that he stopped releasing after 2014. Something interesting about the Liquid Stranger project is that Martin originally intended to remain anonymous. The plan was to have multiple people who would perform live as Liquid Stranger, but he had no way to make sure that the people that he sent out would actually be suitable to represent the brand, so he decided to do it himself. Plus, Chill Records had already blown his cover by writing his real name on his record sleeves. In 2006, Martin moved to Arizona after getting a scholarship for martial arts, where he attended Glendale Community College, then Arizona State University.
You know, music has always been a big passion. Martial arts has always been an equally big passion. The reason why I moved to the States was to study and teach martial arts.
He decided to major in kinesiology because of how it was linked to martial arts. He took a psychology class and loved it, so he ended up graduating with degrees in both kinesiology and psychology, and he even had a 4.0 GPA. Now, all this time while he was in college, he was also training under his martial arts mentor, Harley Reagan. He eventually began running Reagan's dojo, teaching classes while touring as Liquid Stranger on the side, which he just treated as a hobby back then. When he was at the peak of his training, he took a break from music entirely. One thing worth mentioning that I want to squeeze in here is that he studied Native American plant medicine, and he's partaken in many ceremonies. He also spent 4 years living in an ashram, which is a monastery in Indian religions. I'm not really sure where these two things fit into the timeline, but I felt that they were worth mentioning just because it gives us a deeper look into his life influences. By 2007, the first full-length Liquid Stranger album was released on Interchill Records called The Invisible Conquest. The album was well received, and it was given high praise from critics. 2 years later, in 2009, he released his second album on Interchill, The Intergalactic Slapstick. Just 1 year later, he released his third album, this time on Excision's record label, Rotten Recordings. The album is called The Private Riot, and the track named Ripple hit #1 on Beatport, and it stayed at #1 for quite a while. Only 8 months later, he released another album on Rotten Recordings called Mechanoid Meltdown, which was mostly dubstep, but it also featured a few drum and bass tracks. That same year, he also self-released the Steel Trap EP. In 2011, he released his fifth album, The Arcane Terrain, as well as the Wetware Warfare EP. Album number 6 came in 2012, called Cryogenic Encounters, and in 2013, he released the Elemental EP. Now, just as a quick side note, I'm not going to mention every single Liquid Stranger release because his discography is massive, but I'll try to mention the major bodies of work like EPs and albums. Another thing that I want to squeeze in here is that Martin has done multiple film scores, but unfortunately I couldn't find any info on the films. He mentioned in a text interview that he was working on a couple different ones, and in a video interview with Ill Gates, he mentions a single one that he was working on. I'm curious to know what films they are, so if anyone knows anything about that, I would love to know more, so let me know in the comments if you have any info.
You know, same with visual artists I like working with. You know, I'm scoring a film at the moment. You know, I find a great joy in that.
So at this point, we're up to 2013, and this brings us to a crucial moment in Martin's life that was a catalyst for the birth of Wakaan. In 2013, Martin's martial arts mentor Harley Reagan passed away, which sent Martin into a deep depression.
My mentor, Soke Reagan, who I moved to Arizona to study under, he died, he passed away, it's close to 5 years ago now, and that is when I really started to take my music super seriously, and when I decided that I wanted to do more for the community, and that was the start, that was the birth of Wakaan. Wakaan is meant to be, you know, like a public aid for aspiring producers and a way to just like create a strong community for all the people who like freeform music, you know? And I think based on the principle of just inclusiveness and generosity, it's gained a lot of traction, which I'm very happy about.
While reminiscing on this time in his life during an interview, he said, "I was desperately looking for ways to progress in my own path, yet honor all of the things that he taught me. I was searching for a bigger purpose. After some time, I realized how I could speak to more people and be a force of good through music. I wanted to try to build a community larger than the Martial Arts Academy, which was roughly 20 to 30 students at a time. That's when the idea for Wakaan came about, and I ran with it." He wanted to be able to connect with other producers and share resources with them, which is exactly what he's done with Wakaan over the past decade. However, he didn't launch the label right away, but things were set in motion. In 2014, he released the Renegade Crusade EP, which was his final release before the official launch of Wakaan. Now, before the idea of Wakaan came about, Martin had signed with his manager, Loper, but I'm unsure of exactly when that happened. But when Martin told Loper that he wanted to start a label, Loper thought it was a terrible idea, though that didn't stop Martin from doing it anyways.
When you told me 6-7 years ago, I'm going to start a label, I was like, oh, it's a terrible idea. We should definitely not do that. Sounds like a fucking shit ton of work, and it's going to, you know, the last thing we need is another artist-ran label. But it's only, you know, that thought was because there's I think a lack of caring that people have for that. They they say that they definitely do care about artists, but that isn't naturally always shown through their willingness to share the limelight. And I think that you differ from that quite a bit, which is exactly why I'm super glad to be wrong about the label in itself.
Before the launch of Wakaan, Martin began working with a comic artist named Nicholas Chamberlain, who essentially turned Liquid Stranger into a comic book character for his cover art. In a 2015 interview, Martin said that he planned to work with Nicholas to create a Wakaan comic book where the artists are the lead characters, but I couldn't find any info on whether or not this actually came to fruition, so if you know anything about it, please let me know in the comments. Now, regardless of whether or not the comic book actually came to fruition, Martin did use Nicholas's comic art for his releases on Wakaan for quite a few years. And on July 28th, 2015, Liquid Stranger released Nomad Volume 1, which contained 3 tracks as well as the art from Nicholas, and it was the first ever Wakaan release. I'm not going to go very deep on the history of Wakaan in this video because that could be a whole other video on its own, but I will be touching on key points throughout the rest of the video. From the very beginning of Wakaan, the label was off to the races with fast-paced releases from Liquid Stranger and various other artists.
And I built myself an entire Wakaan going through small off markets and to places where they normally don't get a lot of cool shit coming through. I'm from a small little fishing village in Sweden. It's like I had to fend for myself in a very proactive way to get to experience anything. No one came there. So yeah. I think I'm just rooting for the rednecks, like, cause I'm one. Like I think.
Hey, let's go, bro. That's me, baby.
And what I found too is that you go to those places and you put on a hell of a show and you pack in way more PK subs and lasers that actually even fits in the venue. But just those people are loyal fans, man, and they will also travel to come see you. So it's sort of, I think it's very important. It's the right thing to do, at least for me as a little country boy.
Sometime around 2017 or 2018, Martin relocated from Scottsdale, Arizona to a suburb of Oklahoma City, which is where the Wakaan team is based today. At least I'm assuming that it was sometime around 2017 or 2018 based on the information that I found, but I could be wrong. I saw Liquid Stranger at a festival in 2016 and I didn't know who he was at the time, so I looked up his SoundCloud, which said he was from Scottsdale, but I suppose he could have already moved at that point, but just hadn't updated his SoundCloud. He played at the Oklahoma City Farmers Market in 2018, so I assume that he was already living there at that point. So between that and his SoundCloud saying Arizona in late 2016, I assume that he moved in 2017 or 2018. Oklahoma City seems to be a pretty random place for an artist of his caliber to live, but I suspect it had something to do with his relationship with Loper, his manager.
I met you in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and through one of my first management clients in dance music.
When we think about Martin's strategy to build his brand through underserved markets, Oklahoma City starts to make more sense. And when planning the first ever Wakaan festival, the Wakaan team definitely stayed true to this strategy. In 2019, the first ever Wakaan festival took place on Mulberry Mountain, nestled in the Ozarks of Arkansas. It's honestly a genius location for a festival because it's in the center of some of the most underserved mid-major markets in the country. There's actually an interesting story of how Wakaan Fest came to be, as it was actually a fan's idea, not Martin's or Wakaan.
Some kid had made a flyer of some mock festival and put Wakaan letterhead at the top of it and was like, it would be super badass if this happened. And it was the first, I think, flyer floating around the internet of Wakaan Festival.
Yep, I do remember that.
Like, we were all very like, I remember, I think you screenshotted it and a few other people screenshotted it and sent it to me. And they were like, did you guys book this? And I was like, I have no idea what this is, but it looked weirdly professional and maybe not professional, but like looked like something that we would, do. And I was like, oh my God, did I like confirm something and not write it down? Or like, I can't even imagine this like thing of this magnitude, like, you know, happening without like just some, and come to find out it was like this like made up dream lineup that this kid had kind of created, but it was like pretty on brand. But weirdly enough, like it caught a lot of momentum online, and there was like tons of comments and lots of people being like, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. And that actually was the first thought about doing Wakaan Festival.
And I do remember, well, first off, that felt slightly flattering, I guess, that we would be,
Yeah.
you know, hold to that high standard, you know, in someone's eyes. But secondly, we started joking about it, like how crazy would it be? And it wasn't even fully a seriously developed thought at that point.
It was, there wasn't a serious thought about it for like sometime later. In fact, like it took a while for us to like roll around the marbles, and then we were like, maybe, just fucking maybe.
The first ever Wakaan Fest was a hit, but unfortunately there was no Wakaan Fest for the following 2 years due to COVID. Now, earlier in 2019, before Wakaan Fest, Liquid Stranger released a 30-track album called Infinity, as well as his biggest track with Ganja White Knight, Jungle Juice. And just before everything was shut down in 2020, he released his Ascension EP. In May of 2020, Wakaan had to make the announcement that there would be no Wakaan Fest in 2020. They took to Instagram saying, "As we walk through unparalleled times, it's important to remember why we do what we do." Wakaan Festival was extremely special because it wasn't something that we had ever thought about doing. You, the fans, are the ones who put the festival in play, and every time we were met with adversity and hesitation, we powered through because we realized this was something bigger than ourselves. As we've said from the beginning, this is your festival just as much as it is ours. It's an ecosystem made up of people coming together and contributing for the greater good. We have become family, created lifelong bonds, and forged beautiful memories together. This community and these relationships are something we truly cherish and must protect at all costs. This virus has been devastating. It has had an effect on almost everyone we know. Many of our family members, friends, and colleagues have been touched in some way. COVID-19 has forced us to change how we do things. It has made a significant impact on all of our livelihoods and how we interact in social settings and, more importantly, how we interact with one another. Due to COVID-19, we will be postponing the 2020 Wakaan Music Festival and hope to return in 2021. This decision was based on a multitude of different variables, but health and safety are the main reasons. We feel that it's better to heed caution than force this and potentially put you, the artists, and the staff in jeopardy. We are currently planning the festival for September 29th through October 2nd, 2021. We will have more information later this year, so please continue to follow Wakaan Fest for the latest updates and details. We will get through this together. Until then, please stay healthy and safe. Our thoughts continue to be with you, your families, your communities, and the world as a whole. Much love, Wakaan. Now, unfortunately, there was no Wakaan Fest in 2021 either, but Martin did take advantage of the lockdowns, using them as a much-needed break from all of the work he had put into Liquid Stranger and Wakaan over the past 2 decades. Though, while he got some much-needed rest, he still gave back to the community by starting a brother label to Wakaan. In 2020, he and his team launched Sasquan, which focuses more on down-tempo music.
Starting up the new label, which is going to be called Sasquan. Wakaan is the female essence of God, and Sasquan is the male essence. When they meet, they create Wakaan Tanka, so that's Native American kind of Native American-based names.
Speaking about Sasquan in an interview, he said, "We wanted to expand the collective to include more melodic, soothing, organic songs. I feel it's very utilitarian music that many people can find a place for in their lives. For example, when driving, meditating, or relaxing. That's what the brother label Sasquan is about. One of my long-term goals is to help make the US climate for downtempo shows as vibrant as what the climate for full-on dance shows currently is." He got back to releasing music and touring in 2021, and Wakaan Fest was back in 2022 for its 2nd year, and Liquid Stranger also released his most recent album that year, Balance. The 3rd ever Wakaan Fest took place in 2023, as well as the release of a new Liquid Stranger EP, Unity, which is his most recent release at the time that I'm making this video. Aside from music, Martin has a plethora of interests, such as his wacky and colorful fashion sense, playing Warhammer 40k, and more.
I have a lot of silly interests that I do. I build little diorama landscapes. Dioramas?
Okay, I don't know.
It's like miniature nature.
Got
basically.
you. Okay, cool.
But it's all artificial, so I build it with static grass and plants and stuff. And then...
Like Legos, but with real life shit.
I spray paint, I paint miniatures. I'm one of those nerdy people who like Warhammer 40k. So building little miniatures and painting them really well, and then playing with my friends and stuff. I have a ton of interest outside of this.
He continues to practice martial arts such as jiu-jitsu, karate, and a bunch of other ones that I can't pronounce. He also does tantric yoga, and speaking about this, he said, "People think you do some workout, but it's a whole lifestyle that's hygiene, breathing exercises, meditation, and a kind of work ethic within." He puts a great level of intentionality into everything that he does, keeping his sights set on the bigger picture.
There has to be a destination. It's not just existing in a vacuum, doing all these things, all these shows to make money. It's to keep the machine rolling and make it powerful and stronger and have a more positive impact on people. So that's why we gotta keep growing and getting out of our comfort zone. And when I'm on my deathbed, I want to die clean.
Yeah. And what exactly do you mean by that?
I mean that I want to, there is this ancient concept of karma, which I look at as cause and effect relationships. And, karma is said to be, the way of repeating certain teachings until you get them. And I think that's how it seems like my life is working. So I want to dying clean means that I don't have any karma, meaning I don't have any moral lessons or things that this bag of guilt and shame that I carry to my deathbed. And that's where I feel very good about what it is that we do, because it comes from a very pure place.
Martin has had an incredible career as Liquid Stranger, but what I think is even more incredible is the community that he has built and the sheer number of artists that he has propped up through Wakaan. Coming from a small town in Sweden, he's gone through life as an underdog, and because of that, he loves helping out all of the other underdogs, which is essentially the foundation of Wakaan. He strategically carved out his own very unique lane in electronic music, and now he brings other people down the path that he laid out. In a scene that can sometimes be driven by ego and self-gain, it's very apparent that Martin is one of the realest in the game.